So I also encourage everyone to listen to the RFK conversation with Rogan, 3 hours. It's remarkable. And the other piece of it that Prasad takes on, which with which he strenuously disagrees, it's not just the repurposed drugs, ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, it's childhood vaccine safety, right? So Prasad focuses on RFK Jr.'s contention that childhood MMR and DTaP vaccines are responsible for the rise in autism. I don't know. If you had said that to me 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and people did, I would have said, no, stop it. I'm not going there, not listening, not interested. Well, one has to begin to be interested in looking and going there at this point. I don't want to. I haven't gone there yet, but I don't know. I am not simply going to dismiss it out of hand as I have in the past. And frankly, again, the links that Prasad puts up as his evidence against the claims that Kennedy makes are puff pieces. One is to the Mayo Clinic. Oh, Mayo Clinic, they're doing medicine, they must know. But it's a puff piece. It just asserts the safety of childhood vaccines, but it, once again, doesn't actually provide any evidence. So assertions are not evidence, assertions are not science, assertions are not the basis on which we should be deciding what it is to inject into our children. It's not how it's supposed to work. And again, I don't want to be here, right? I don't know. However, there is another claim that Kennedy makes on Rogan's podcast that I do have some knowledge about, which is one that there hasn't been nearly as much focus on, which is that he says, and I don't have the direct quote, I wasn't sure exactly where it was in there, I don't have the direct quote, something to the effect of none of the vaccines currently in the childhood vaccination schedule in the US have been tested against placebo. Well, it is true. And the question of what constitutes a placebo does begin to get us into a little bit of complicated waters here. But here's just 3 examples. I have not independently verified this is true for every single childhood currently recommended on the childhood vaccine schedule by the CDC, but I have seen very careful analyses, and I just haven't gone into the actual, the pharmaceutical reports that are the inserts with the vaccines for all of them, but for some of them I have. So here are just 3 examples. DTaP, which is the diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis vaccine, has never been tested against placebo. What has been tested against is the older DTP vaccine. And the older DTP vaccine, which was generated in the 1930s, was never subject to clinical trials at all. DTP is in fact known to be dangerous, and so we all know, all we know is that if the clinical trials for DTaP were otherwise done well, even if everything else was according to protocol and according to good scientific thinking, all we know, if DTaP comes out looking good in those clinical trials, is that it is not as dangerous as the DTP vaccine was. We have no evidence that DTaP itself is safe relative to not getting any vaccine at all, okay? Similarly,
that's an egregious abuse of the concept of placebo.
Right, so, and I have reason to believe that this is the case for every single one of the vaccines currently on the childhood vaccine schedule. This is abhorrent, okay? So here's the other 2 that I specifically looked into, and there are, of course, many more, as we've talked about in the last couple of weeks when we were talking about the book Where There Is No Doctor and the recent changes to the childhood vaccine schedule, both in the US and worldwide. HIB, which is Haemophilus influenzae type B, was never tested against placebo. There's a lot of HIB vaccines out there, a lot of different trials. It's never tested against placebo in any one of them. It's tested against a different HIB vaccine. It's tested against DTaP, which again was tested against DTP, which wasn't tested against anything at all. It's tested against other vaccines yet, or in some cases, it's tested against literally all of those at once. No placebo test at all, okay? So how do we know that they're safe? One more. Pneumococcal disease, also never tested against placebo. Prevnar 13, which is the newest version of the vaccine for pneumococcal disease, was tested against Prevnar, the original version, okay? What was Prevnar tested against? Oh, that was a control group that received an experimental meningococcal vaccine. The original Prevnar, the original pneumococcal disease vaccine, was tested against another experimental vaccine. And now the new Prevnar vaccine is tested against that first one, which was tested against a different experimental vaccine. None of them ever tested against placebo. In none of these cases do we actually know if they are safe relative to just not getting an injection at all with these drugs. Safe relative to getting an injection with saline. That is what we need to have happen. So I don't know. I don't know what is true about childhood vaccine safety. I don't know. What I do know is that the vaccines that we're giving our children have not been tested in the way that everyone, if they thought about it, would assume they had been tested.